Introduction. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I am substitute sharing since Joe, our new chair, and Mark, our new vice chair, both couldn't be here tonight. So it's still me. And we'll start with introductions. So I'm Allie Pesh, and I live near Mint Springs. Anne, you want to go next?
Good evening, everyone. Ann Malik. I'm on the farm in early. Oh, it says I'm muted, but I'm not.
You're not. I can hear you.
Okay, good. Very good. So I'm on the farm in Earlysville, but very glad to connect with all of you tonight.
And we have a new member, Mallory. So I'll call on you next. Thanks for joining the committee.
Hey everybody, yeah, so this is my first meeting as a committee member, Mallory Decoster. I've lived in Crozet for just under 10 years and I live in the Western Ridge neighborhood.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
Sean?
Hi, everyone. Sean Bird, live off of St. George, and we're at our 6-year anniversary in town.
Nice. Jim?
Hey, Jim Duncan, live in Parkside Village.
Valerie?
Hi, I'm Valerie Long and I live in Old Trail.
Costas?
Costas Albertus, I live out on 250.
Ken?
Hey, everybody. Ken Thacker. I live on St. George Avenue in downtown Crozet.
Nice. Michael? Sorry, we started just before you stepped in, but
yeah, no problem. Yeah, Michael Monaco. I live in Emerson Commons over by Star Hill.
Great. Did I miss anybody committee member wise? All right, so this meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with emergency ordinance number 20-A16, an emergency ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. We just did our committee members just introduce themselves. The persons responsible for receiving public comment are the Crozet Community Advisory Committee. Opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting are posted on the Albemarle County calendar. And tonight for county staff, we have Rachel Falkenstein. Hi. Carolyn Schaefer. Gabe Daly. Hi. And that's it, right?
Yes.
All right. So do we have a quorum now?
We have 8. I think that'll do it.
That sounds like enough.
And
right.
Sandy said she'd be a few minutes late, so she'll be joining shortly.
Yes. So did everyone get a chance to look over the minutes that Valerie completed her service as secretary last month? And if so, do I have a motion to approve those minutes? Costas, do I have a second? Sean? Everybody in favor of approving the April minutes? Say aye, raise your hand. Looks like unanimous. All right, so tonight we have Gabe, who is talking about the climate action planning for the county. So I will hand it over to you guys.
Thank you. Rachel, did you want to say anything first or should I just jump right in?
No, go ahead, Gabe, you can jump right in.
Cool. I stepped away for a second to get some overhead lighting so you wouldn't just see half of my face. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join the Crozet Community Advisory Committee. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. And I'm at Rachel's in part invitation, I'm kind of making the rounds at all of the community advisory committees in May. So it's a busy month and I'm excited to be able to chat a little bit about our climate protection program at the county and also hear your thoughts and questions and ideas and the like. So really appreciate your time tonight. I wanted to start, so I do have some slides and kind of a colorful presentation to share, but before I jump in with the screen share, I actually wanted to just ask, maybe folks could type in the chat, at the prospect of listening to a county staff person talk about climate action and climate change, what's like the first feeling or thought that comes to mind? And it could be anything. It could be like you're excited. It could be that you want to tune out and you're ready for the next, Netflix show episode. Maybe you feel really overwhelmed or scared about the climate crisis. So it could be kind of anything, but I'm just curious to get a sense, if just, if folks are willing to humor me. Although I don't see
Unfortunately, we're not allowed to use the chat.
not allowed to use the chat. All righty.
No.
Well, maybe if popcorn is okay, if folks feel comfortable, just kind of like, what's the first thought that comes to mind when you hear climate change, or the climate program manager is here to talk about that?
I'll jump in because I hope that I will hear some real substantive things we're going to do, not just talk about it.
Anybody else? First thought, best thought?
So I'll throw something out. One of the things that I've noticed, having been here since the 1980s, is that Crozet seems to be temperature-wise, truly in the wintertime. We used to be a lot cooler than Charlottesville, and now our temperature seems to be more comparable to Charlottesville. And I think some of the growth has taken away some of the coverage, the greenery and the grass, and that's led to the community being a little bit warmer. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that. But, how do we attempt to address what we've lost?
I mean, I'll throw in that I'm pleased that that we're having this meeting, because I've been on the CCAC for 6 years and attended more years before that, and we've never talked about this topic as the committee. So I'm both excited and also a little I don't know, it feels like a bad, like we're at a point now that even things are so bad that we're talking about it at the CAC or something like that. So I echo Anne. I'm curious to hear if we have, more than talk at this point.
Yeah, I feel excited that this is a topic this is my first meeting, and I joined this group because I care about the environmental issues, particularly in this county. And so I am really interested to hear what you have to say.
Cool. Well, thank you.
I'd like to, my first thought is, forgive me, is futility, because people refuse to choose to act accordingly to the crisis that we have coming in with respect to climate change. And we need to build the appropriate infrastructure to support getting people out of their cars, on bike ped, and have the businesses to support that in downtown central locations. And we just need to change community behavior. When you see, dozens of cars idling for no good reason for hours at a time, I think climate change is a real legitimate thing, but I don't know what the viable action items are that the CCAC can voice our opinion on.
Yeah, I hear that. Thank you. Well, if I'll maybe move in and get going, and if other folks have thoughts you want to chime in with, of course, I think we'll have some time for conversation. So thank you thanks for the initial thoughts. It's helpful just for me to kind of get a sense of what's on your minds, what folks are thinking about. All right, let me see if I can pull up the screen share, and you might see your faces for a second. I'm going to do the full screen so I can show a couple of websites very briefly in the midst of the PowerPoint. But for now, can you see the PowerPoint filling up my screen? Great. Cool. Well, again, thanks so much for having me. So in the PowerPoint, I wanted to just cover a few kind of four main things very briefly. say a couple words to frame the discussion, although your comments so far have also done a really nice job of doing that. Give a little bit of an update about the climate protection program, where we've been, what we're currently working on. And then also wanted to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about some intersections between climate action and the comprehensive plan. I know that folks generally in the community are very interested in the comprehensive plan process that has kicked off. And that was partially why Rachel had invited me to speak with the CACs in May, kind of early in the comprehensive plan process, because the Board of Supervisors has been rightly emphatic about the importance of integrating climate action and equity into the comprehensive plan update. So I wanted to include a few elements. It won't be comprehensive, but include a few elements of intersections between those two aspects of our county work. And then share a few elements of how you all can get involved. And that also, won't be exhaustive, but hopefully we'll give some places to start. So first off, framing the discussion, I just wanted to share three things. One is that climate change is big and can feel overwhelming. And, I think sometimes in kind of professional spaces, policy spaces, local government, state government, science, we can sometimes kind of shy away from, that side of things. But the number 2 point is there's research showing that actually just kind of like acknowledging, our reaction, whatever it might be to climate change, can actually help us move toward effective action. So that's something I've been trying to do more and more in conversations that I'm having with folks. And the final one is you can definitely be part of the solution. So there's ways that local government can take important action in the community, and there's also ways in which everyone in the community can take part in helping us meet our targets. I'll talk about what those targets are in a couple of minutes. But I think particularly, thinking about community advisory committee, there's maybe a little extra agency there that you all have as being folks in somewhat of a community leadership position. So just wanted to offer that thought. So climate protection program update. I want to start by just a quick rewind, since it's my first time meeting all of you, and just wanted to, I don't know how much folks have followed the climate action planning process for the county thus far. So I'll just give like a little brief synopsis of a bit of kind of the key points of where we've been, and then talk about what we're currently working on. So some of you might know that the county adopted a climate action plan in October 2020. And broadly speaking, that climate action plan has 4 key themes that aim to be consistent with the county's vision and values. And so looking to help through our efforts to address global climate change. We also want to attend to our local health of people and place here, benefiting the local economy through our climate action. Also the local environment, thinking about some of our intersecting county priorities like clean water and biodiversity, and then making sure that the work that we do has, and the services that we offer to folks are equitable and inclusive in how they involve people in the community and bring benefits. The climate action plan guides work towards greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for 2030 and 2050. And those targets were set by the Board of Supervisors in 2019. Oh, excuse me. Well, I'll come back to the targets in a second, but I'll with a visual, I'll just say for the moment that so the targets are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from 2008 levels by 45% by 2030, and to achieve 0 net emissions by 2050. And those targets were set to be consistent with guidance from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, that has produced some of those major reports over the last couple of decades that folks might be following. The plan divides up the strategies and actions. There's 135 distinct action areas grouped into, I think, 35 strategies, and those are grouped within 5 kind of common areas of action. So There's actions looking at transportation and land use, looking at building energy use, sustainable materials management, renewable energy sourcing, and landscape, natural resources, and agriculture. Probably many folks on this call recognize the photo on the top left, which is of a street in Crozet. That is, I show that one as an example of a complete street, so to speak, which is a term that refers to a street that has space for cars, for bicycles, and for pedestrians, and has some kind of greenery and foliage on it to make the walk enjoyable. And some of you might know the photo on the bottom left is the rooftop of the Crozet Library, small rooftop solar installation we have there. So, like I mentioned a minute ago, the county's targets are to reduce emissions by 45% from 2008 levels by 2030 and to achieve zero net emissions by 2050. And I wanted to show just a picture, which I'll come back to a little bit later in the presentation, of our 2018 greenhouse gas emission inventory. We're currently working on an update to that inventory. This one is for the year 2018, the pie chart you're seeing, and we're currently working on our 2020 inventory. There's always about a couple of year lag because of some of the data inputs for these types of inventories when they become available. But a greenhouse gas inventory is our main tool for monitoring progress toward meeting those targets. And so that's important. And I'll talk about, when I get to kind of connecting with the comprehensive plan, some of the significance of the slices of the pie that you can see there. So this just a linear chart showing our equivalent carbon dioxide emissions from 2018. I don't know if folks can see my cursor, but the first green dot on the left before the dotted line is our most recent inventory from 2018. And then you can kind of get a sense of an idealized slope along the dashed line of moving in the direction of the 2030 and 2050 targets. So that's just a little bit of an update of kind of where we've been, the planning work that we've done, the greenhouse gas inventory report that we've done. And if folks have questions at the end, happy to come back and look at any of these slides if you'd like. So what are we doing now? So the climate protection program has two main kind of channels of activity. We have this climate action plan that was adopted in 2020 that came out of a lot of collaborative work among staff, community members, partner organizations, received really extensive and helpful feedback from the Board of Supervisors before they adopted the final plan. So the kind of left-hand stream is now we're implementing that climate action plan. And there's the top 2 points. I mentioned we're doing another greenhouse gas inventory to help monitor progress. But the first 2 points are broadly what we're doing with that plan. So that plan has a lot of actions that are community facing that seek to help to instigate action kind of and emissions reductions across the community. And then a subset of actions are designed to help local government and schools lead by example. So this year, we've been in a process of working to update our operational policies and procedures for local government. Like I said, so that we can lead by example. And that has a few main areas, looking at our fleet and transitioning over more to an electric fleet. Looking at our buildings, making sure that we're updating the energy efficiency of our buildings and also where possible, adding renewable energy generation. We're also looking at how the county manages landscapes that it owns. So that includes like parks and natural areas, as well as school grounds. And then we're soon going to be starting to look also at our own procurement and the sustainability of the materials that we procure, like plastics and paper and things like that. And then for the community-oriented actions, a big piece of the work that we've been up to has been, well, there's 2 big pieces. One is implementing some of those actions with existing partnerships that we have. But the second big piece is prioritizing those actions so that we can move through them in a more strategic and systematic way. The climate action plan that was adopted in 2020 was intended to be it was called the phase 1 plan. And the strategies and actions have really good, they give really good direction. They have really good language, but they lack some measure of like specificity, measurability, and time-bound aspects to some of that language. So you might be familiar with the notion of SMART goals. So we're working to smarten the language of the actions and goals in the plan so that we can better track what we're doing and move forward in a more systematic way. The second big track of what we're doing is climate adaptation and resilience planning. That's like a couple of you mentioned, climate change is already here, and more is coming, even despite everyone in the world engaging in best efforts. Even if everyone were to be kind of doing everything we could with mitigating the intensity of climate change, some of it is already baked in at this point, so we need to prepare for those impacts. We've done a vulnerability and risk assessment this year that we will be sharing with the board and the community in the next month or two, and then getting going with a planning process to involve community members in creating a climate resilience plan to help build resilience. Let me see if I can switch screens here for a moment, because I wanted to just briefly give you a sense, a little bit better sense of what I was talking about. Maybe Ali, give me a nod if you can see the website screen. Cool. So I don't expect anyone to be able to read the text at the moment, but I did just want to share so you kind of get a little bit more of a sense than just that one slide of what we're working on. Over here on the far left is the climate protection program, and those two main streams, implementing the climate action plan and the resilience planning, are here. So with implementing the climate action plan, just wanted to kind of give you a sense of some of the work that's underway. We have the local government sustainable operations policies and procedures, looking at our buildings, looking at our fleet, landscape management policies. And then we have this work underway to set smarter goals, prioritize actions, and engage in cost benefit and risk opportunity analysis so that we can be implementing the plan in the most strategic way possible. So just kind of, and both of those move towards emissions reductions in the community. So I just wanted to share some of that work that we're doing. And then up here, we have this vulnerability assessment report that has come out. We're developing our communications materials to be able to share that with the community. And then that'll feed into a planning process around climate adaptation and resilience plan. We also applied for some money from the state government. They have a community flood preparedness fund that we applied for a chunk of money to help us with the flood preparedness aspect of our climate resilience planning process. So wanted to just kind of share that little map that staff have been using to help track our work thus far. Okay, so that's kind of the climate program that we've been working on. And next, just wanted to share a little bit about climate action and the comprehensive plan update. So giving you that visual again of the greenhouse gas emissions, understanding the sources and distribution of where our emissions are coming from in the community will help us integrate the climate action plan into the comprehensive plan. And for those of you who follow climate change and climate action in the news, if you've read about it, often in more kind of like just urban areas or cities proper, you tend to see buildings being a higher proportion, sometimes a little bit over 50% of the emissions in that city. But since Albemarle County is a large geographic area, we're a little bit different. So for us, transportation is just over 50% of our emissions, and then buildings are, or here it's labeled stationary energy, but buildings come in second at almost 40%. This is the same chart with just a little bit of a color switch that I'll use for the rest of the presentation. I liked the images that Rachel and her team put into their comprehensive plan background report. So to give you a sense of this. So first off, what jumps out at me is, like I said, transportation being a little over 50%. And I wanted to point out something that Rachel and Tori and the comprehensive planners put into their background report on growth management. There was this chart that shows, this was kind of on average between 2015 and 2019. So there might be some changes in the COVID and post-COVID world. But this was a really interesting chart to me that came from the American Community Survey about, this is specific to Albemarle County, and it's the share of different types of modes that people went by different trips. So first off, just wanted to point out that in between 2015 and 2019, according to the survey, 8.5% of folks worked at home in the county. And maybe that went up a bit during COVID, and maybe it'll stay up a bit even as folks are starting to return to work. So I wanted to mention that briefly. But what I really wanted to call your attention to were the somewhat low percentage points in the middle with public transportation, walking and bicycling. And I heard, I think at least one of you, maybe a couple of you mentioned at the beginning that the importance of increasing opportunities and feasibility for folks to choose to be able to walk or bike or take public transit. So one of the questions I wanted to kind of pose that I'm thinking about a lot, and I know that Rachel and her team are thinking about, is how can growth management and land use decisions help us increase the percentages of public transit, walking, and biking? I mentioned that I'm thinking about that. Rachel's thinking about that. I also know the Board of Supervisors is thinking about that very seriously. So that's one question. These are not all the answers. These are just a few ideas that folks in kind of the climate action field often talk about. So that term I mentioned, complete streets, making sure that street infrastructure is equipped to allow cyclists and pedestrians to also use the roadway and feel safe doing so and feel comfortable doing so. Thinking about density in terms of development and mixed use, so that someone can not necessarily have to get in their car to go pick up some groceries several miles away, but maybe there's like a small bodega near where they live to be able to run an errand on foot, for example. And then looking at, that's kind of related to infill development, which just means filling in kind of like open barren spaces that are in between areas that are already developed. And also thinking about kind of the share of real estate that we offer to cars by way of parking versus the real estate that's, so to speak, that's available for transit, bike, and ped infrastructure. Those are just some kind of food for thought around that I think about in terms of transportation, and wanted to bring into the conversation with you. For buildings, which is another big area, wanted to put out a few ideas. Transportation and land use, there's maybe more decisions that staff and the Board of Supervisors can put into something like a comprehensive plan and then have that update the county code. And I know there's the zoning ordinance update that's happening, but there's also things that we can think about in terms of how the comprehensive plan can support changes in building energy use, reductions in building energy use. So prioritizing electrification in buildings. So moving those appliances over from gas to electric, solar energy systems on rooftops, and the county speaking to our desire to promote those types of systems with buildings, and also adaptive reuse of existing buildings rather than necessarily kind of tearing down a building that could function, building something new. I'm gonna skip waste just for the sake of this presentation, but I did really want to highlight something about agriculture. And it's a little funny because in our greenhouse gas inventory, thus far, all that we've included are kind of an estimate of emissions from raising livestock. And I know that cattle and other livestock have gotten a bad rap in the last number of years with greenhouse gas emissions. But what I wanted to share that's not shown here, but that is as an appendix in our 2018 inventory, is some information about the county's forests and natural areas. So on the right, believe it or not, is a map of tree canopy cover based on data sets that colleagues of mine were able to put together of existing forests or forest kind of canopy cover in the county. And as part of gathering that data and making use of it, they found that our forests are helping us quite a lot. They're sequestering, drawing down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, almost 1 million carbon dioxide metric tons equivalent per year. So they're really helping us. We didn't count that in our kind of inventory favor in our accounting because it's not something that's happening due to county policy in this moment. But we can think about how we can protect that capacity of the county's forests that are helping us in terms of carbon sequestration. And obviously it'd be nice to prevent those from becoming emitters of carbon through deforestation and the like. So how can growth management help us in that endeavor? A couple of points there in terms of conservation and stewardship. And then as possible, increasing sequestration by adding tree canopy in some of the development areas. Yeah, Sean, do you want to?
Hey, Gabe, yeah, just while you're covering this topic, do you have any measure or mapping of how tree canopy cover has changed over the last certain amount of time?
Not at my fingertips, but that's a great question. And this research that my colleagues worked on did come from basically a look at 2008 to 2016. So the 950,000 carbon dioxide tons equivalent per year was actually an average over the course of an annual average from 2008 to 2016. And that there was land use change. The forests were continuing to sequester carbon for us each year over those years, but at somewhat of a decreasing rate. And so there was a higher sequestration value in 2008 and a little bit lower in 2016 due to land use cover changes. So some forests changing to grasslands, some changing to new development. And I can send a link afterwards to the CAC if it would be helpful to the appendix in the greenhouse gas inventory, which kind of details that a little bit more and shows a table of that change over time.
Because in Crozet, I think for a lot of us, we'd be quite interested about what's been happening since 2016, since there's been such incredible growth during that period. And, if anyone goes to Crozet Park and, sees there's been a lot of loss of canopy here in the growth area. And I think for a lot of us, we'd be pretty interested what it looks like, leading right up to today. But
yes. Supervisor Malik.
One possible way to get some information would be the aerial photographs that have changed. If there's a possible link that you can share to how we can easily access those aerials, that would be great, because I think the shock from 2004 to today, from Old Trail and all the other places, taking down the trees, and even just a small acreage, but an astonishing loss there around Crozet Park when the buffer was bulldozed last year. Those kinds of things really, really do make a difference. And that heat island that Sean mentioned earlier is really coming.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I will follow up with colleagues to send some information, and then part of our inventory this year will be to hopefully provide at least a couple years worth of updated information to see a little bit more recently. I don't know if we'll get all the way up to 2022 just because of the kind of lag of some data becoming available, but I'll definitely follow up on both Sean and Supervisor Malik's requests in terms of trying to connect to that information. And yeah, you make a really good point about heat island, which is something that we're going to be looking at in the resilience planning process, and what we can do about that. I think about there have been communities where folks have decided that there has to be a certain amount of tree canopy either retained or replaced when certain developments happen. That's been an interesting kind of policy choice that I've seen kind of more and more areas begin to talk about. Because yeah, when you're taking out a lot of trees and then not putting any back, that can be a problem. So just the last few minutes of my kind of presentation piece, and I hope I haven't gone on too long, but would really love to hear your thoughts and have some conversation. There were a couple of things that I wanted to share with how you can get involved. One of them that I'm really excited about that's new that we just launched is I worked with several colleagues in environmental services division and in community development to create an environmental stewardship hub. And the project lead for this was Kim Biasioli, who's the Natural Resources Program Manager. She's also managing the Stream Health Initiative that some of you might have heard about. And so this project kind of grew out of the Stream Health Initiative, and we ended up tackling a number of areas with it, which was exciting. It kind of grew a bit in scope as well. And so it's a very accessible resource on the county website that shares about county programs. So climate action being one of them, but also the others that you can see there: biodiversity, clean water, reducing waste. And then there's a whole set of resources for community members to act, including at home, on your land if you have it, and in your community. And this was a lot of fun to put together. I thought I would do just a quick kind of share of what it looks like. One of the impetuses for this, I'll say, was that there's a lot of information about county programs, and there's information about resources, technical resources, cost share resources that can be relevant to residents of the county. And those were often buried multiple kind of page layers in on the county website under different programs. So we have there's a more technical climate program page. There's, various natural resources pages and pages within pages that have links to cost share programs where folks can get help with, land stewardship and conservation. And we wanted to kind of create a resource where folks could more easily find all of those together. So just to show you very briefly, if you go to the county's website, and if you go over to the community tab on a desktop, right under this big heading, Learn More About, you'll see environmental stewardship in Albemarle County. And if you click on that, you will get to this page. Serena Guria in our communications office did a fantastic job helping us with the visual layout. So you have these tiles here where you can click in and learn a little bit more about the different programs that we have. And then if you scroll down a little bit, you have this section, ways that you can make a difference. So there's at home, in your community, and on your land. And I'll just click on at home because it has the most. So what we've done is we've included the icons just to help people be able to kind of see, what types of program areas does this action help with. So for example, we have an action for Go Solar. That one just lists climate action. But for each of these, we try to keep the description short. So we don't want to kind of overwhelm people with text. So there's a very short description within each of these possible actions, but each one has at least one link that will take folks to where you can, if you want to think seriously about it, where you can find more information about different opportunities to pursue that action, and where there are financial resources that are on the table to help folks with something. We make sure to link to those. Where there are kind of technical educational resources, to help you do something, we make sure to link to those. So right off the bat, I would say definitely take a look at this. A lot of work went into creating it. Climate action, if we're going to be successful, it's going to take local government doing our part, with the programs and services that we offer, and with policy making. And it's also going to take kind of everyone in the community being on board. So we have some actions here that you can do at home, but then we also wanted to make sure to include actions that you can do in your community that maybe you can get together with other folks and kind of magnify your impact. This one's a little shorter from the start just because we were getting to our deadline, which was Earth Day. We wanted to make sure we launched it on Earth Day. So this is a living resource. We're going to continue to flesh this out with additional opportunities. We have 2 or 3 more that are going to be coming up. One that I wanted to highlight in case there are folks who live in a neighborhood where there's common areas or in like a homeowners association. That's one kind of interesting way that's like in between the level of larger region of the county, but also bigger than kind of your own maybe personal impact in your own home, is looking at where HOAs can get involved and help out with some of what we're doing. So I'd encourage you to check this out when you have time, and check back too, because we'll be adding more to that resource. So just 2 final things. We'd love to have you get involved in the climate resilience planning process, which is very much a companion and parallel to our climate mitigation work. Like I said, we're going to have this risk and vulnerability assessment coming out in the next month. And so please do have a look at that, and then participate in the community process to create this kind of adaptation and resilience plan that we're also getting going. And then finally, kind of a nod to the intersections I talked about a little bit earlier. There's a number of different ways to engage in the AC44, the Albemarle Comprehensive Plan update, for looking ahead towards 2044, with a few links here. I'll share this presentation afterwards so that you have access kind of direct to the links through here and can peruse. Yeah, thank you again so much for the opportunity to chat a little bit, and hope I didn't go on in terms of the presentation too long, but also really interested in your thoughts, questions, comments. I'm happy to maybe stop the screen share so initially for chatting, but if anyone does have like a question or comment on a particular page, definitely happy to bring that back up if you want to reference something.
Thank you, Gabe. I think that was great. I'm not sure if Valerie or Sean had their hand up first, so Valerie.
Sure. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Gabe. That was really helpful and informative. I noticed on one of your first or second slides where you showed the glide path for the goal for getting to the emissions reductions. It looked like there was an interesting reduction from like 2006 to 2000, I don't know, maybe 16 or 17. I was just curious what you all attribute that reduction to. Is that energy conservation? I don't know. It looked pretty dramatic, so it was interesting.
Great question, and very perceptive. Yeah, so it was from 2008 to 2018, which were the most recent 2 inventories that the county did. And 2008 is our baseline year for against which the targets are measured. So we attribute that to a couple of things. We saw, despite an increase in basically vehicle trips, an increase in vehicle miles traveled between those 2 years over that decade, we calculated a slight reduction in emissions from the transportation sector. And we think that's largely explainable by increases in vehicle efficiency in kind of fuel economy, miles per gallon. So mostly, so that's the transportation side. Certainly and then in terms of the building side, one of the contributing factors that we attributed to is the electric grid becoming somewhat cleaner due to a large chunk of what in 2008 of the electricity that was being produced was from burning coal in power plants. A lot of that transitioned over to natural gas by 2018. And so natural gas, still fossil fuel, still produces carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions, but burns somewhat cleaner and more efficiently than coal. So probably the reduction in emissions could be attributable to that. In the report, the inventory report, we do note that there's also, folks have raised concerns about some of the methane emissions from natural gas, just kind of like escaping in transmission. And there's been some research on that, but not enough to actually be able to, at least where we felt like we could confidently model it. So there's a bit of an asterisk there that I think is important to point out. But in terms of what we could measure, that's what we attributed that decrease to. It was about a 10% reduction in emissions from 2008 to 2018. And so as you saw, there was kind of an elbow in the curve. To meet the 2030 target, we definitely need to steepen the reductions, but it's good to know that kind of in terms of broad regional changes, we're at least moving somewhat in the right direction.
Great, thank you.
John?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to applaud all the work you're doing. It's actually quite encouraging to know that there's a point person at the county level whose sole job is to work on this stuff. And I thought some of the stuff on the website, like Ann's first concern about really concrete examples of what everyday citizens can do. I really like that list you have on your website. I think that's something that everyone should spend a little time looking at and thinking about how they can incorporate that into their own lives. But my larger question is either for Ann or Gabe. Does the county have any ordinances related to tree canopy requirements or replacement requirements for commercial or residential developers? Because I know other communities in Virginia do have such things, and I just don't know if Albemarle does.
I know that we have been wanting to increase the cap. I think there is some state legislated maximum that we're allowed to require, which is like 10% or something pathetic like that. I know we have not made enough progress on our own policy about canopy protection and the sort of 2-for-1, take down one big one, put up 2 other ones. That has not happened yet. But I certainly think that this suggestion and support for this is all across the county, not just in Crozet. But I know it's been raised here for the whole 14 years because people are very concerned about the loss of trees. And it's a combination thing because we also need at the same time to fix the requirements for the size of trees or the ultimate growth size of trees that are being planted. As you may have driven down some of the streets in Old Trail, which are only 6 years old or 8 years old, and the trees were planted in these very narrow strips between the building and the sidewalk or the sidewalk and the street, and they're already pushing up the sidewalk and their branches are beating on the houses and their roots are invading the cellars because they were not a medium or a small size tree. They were these giant oak trees that were put there because the developer had the choice of fewer large trees or more smaller ones. And I really hope that we'll be able to make that correction so that we don't leave that choice up to somebody whose bottom line is the only thing that is making that deliberation. I hope that the county will say, if you have X square feet of grassy area in which to plant it, that you have these options as opposed to leaving it wide open, because we have a long way to go on that.
Rachel, did you want to respond to that? Or
Yeah, I can provide the percentages while Anne was talking. I looked it up. We have a minimum of 10% for commercial, 15% for sites that are a density between 10 and 20 units an acre, and 20% with residential of 10 units an acre or less. Those are percentage of tree canopy requirements in the current ordinance, but we are updating them, as Anne had mentioned.
And whose job is that to enforce such things and to monitor them over time?
We review it when the site plan is under review with the county and make sure that they have the required tree canopy. Then under construction and before they get a CO, we have code enforcement officers who check that. And then from there on out, it's kind of an honor system, or if there's a complaint, we'll go check on it, but we don't actively monitor sites unless we receive a complaint on them.
Okay, thanks. Carolyn, can we get Sandy back in the panelists? And
I've sent her an invite to become a panelist. She hasn't accepted it yet.
oh, okay. Just, I know that tree canopies is one of Sandy's passions, so I wanted to make sure she could chime in. All right, Mallory.
Hey, Gabe, thank you so much for that presentation. I have 3 questions. The first is going back to those pie charts that you showed us. I was just hoping for a little more detail. And sorry about my voice, I have like weird allergies happening. And of course it hit me today. So you combined the major category of emissions of transportation and land use into one category. What's the reason for that? And do you have any granularity into really like which one is the biggest contributor of greenhouse emissions to that chart? That's my first question.
Is it okay if I go one at a time, just to make sure
Yeah.
I remember?
Yep.
Yeah, so, well, that's a good point of clarification too. That's a little bit, could easily be confusing. So in the greenhouse gas inventory, the emissions are divided up by emission sector, which is transportation emissions. And then you have what's called stationary emissions, which is building energy use, broadly speaking. There's a couple of others related to that. And then you have waste, different forms of waste, and agriculture, forestry, and other land use, AFOLU. And then, so that's in terms of measuring emissions, and the transportation emissions there are coming from vehicle traffic. In the county, we measured on-road vehicle traffic on public roads that have traffic counters, where the state is, where VDOT is able to provide us information about vehicle miles traveled. In the climate action plan, we mostly grouped our actions by those emission sectors, but we added some additional actions that were kind of related, but not perfectly in line because of some of the intersections. So the chapter in the climate action plan is transportation and land use, and includes actions that speak to, thinking about our master plans, our comprehensive plan, ordinances, to think broadly about land use, because the way that we develop, the way that we kind of choose to lay out the community has profound implications for how people can get around, and then therefore the transportation emissions. So but in terms of the greenhouse gas inventory, it's just looking at vehicle traffic. It's the climate action, it's the reduction strategies that bring in that concept of land use, because those are so closely related to each other, or one kind of influences the other.
Okay, yeah, I would love to like see that pie chart in a way that kind of showed how land use really affects emissions, to have a better understanding of how impactful conservation could potentially be. The other thing I was wondering, so based on how you make your measurements, are you able to offer any kind of sort of spatial resolution of how emissions are spread out among the county? So again, could you say like Crozet is a hot spot, but Charlottesville is yellow, and like, is there any way to kind of see what parts of the county are really high emitters?
That's a really good question. I'm going to look into it and follow up. I don't know the answer to that, but that is a really interesting question.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And And that just kind of sets the stage for my last question, which is, it's a question and hopefully like just a comment for discussion too. But I want to just echo Sean's sentiment that I'm so glad that there's somebody at the county who is heading these initiatives for climate change. And I'm wondering how the county will balance its call for conservation with its allocation of designated growth areas like Crozet. Excuse me, sorry. So, you know, I listened to your presentation and I learned some things, but it kind of sounds like the county is asking normal citizens to carpool and install solar panels on their roofs to balance out the loss of streams and stream buffers and green space that they allow to accommodate for growth. And so to me, this just kind of comes as a very unbalanced approach to climate action. And I would just love for there to be a discussion on, you know, like why is there such a disconnect here? And you know, how are ways that we can possibly fix sorry for my voice again.
That's okay. I've been having allergies as well this morning. Your point is really well taken, and I probably can't provide like a fully satisfactory answer, you know, in terms of the whole, and there's elements of your question that speak to, you know, decisions that the Board of Supervisors will make and kind of aspects of how the comprehensive planning process will unfold. What I will say is that the climate action plan has, the actions in the plan have kind of a number of different, like maybe half a dozen common verbs that you will see in the actions. And some of those verbs are update such and such policy or ordinance, or add language to the comprehensive plan and look at opportunities to update like the zoning ordinance or other parts of the county code. There's some language that looks at like explore providing additional services. You'll see some of that in the sustainable materials management chapter around recycling and composting. And then you'll see a number of verbs like promote, encourage, educate, and you'll see some that are incentivize. And that kind of gives you like a sense of from what, you know, we're able to do in local government, kind of the actions at our disposal in terms of how we can try to help stimulate climate action across the community. Some of it are things that we can do with kind of the regulatory and policy environment in the area. And then some of them are things that are, you know, outside of our control, where what we can do is to, you know, find ways to educate and, you know, encourage where possible. In certain places, we can also offer incentives for doing the right thing. So those are kind of, those verbs are kind of like the different tools in our tool belt. And part of our work is to kind of prioritize which ones we do first that'll hopefully have the biggest, you know, ripple effect.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments, Mallory. And Valerie?
Thanks. My question was actually very similar to Mallory's in a sense. I was going to ask you to comment on kind of the intersection between the comments in your slide, and I pulled up the plan while you were talking about incentivizing denser mixed-use development, and how does, I can appreciate everyone's comments about the fact that the tree canopy in the development areas is reducing as new development is approved and built in the designated development areas. But how does that balance with the overall growth management policy of encouraging and incentivizing dense development in those areas in sort of in exchange or instead of developing in the rural areas? My assumption is that the tree canopy in the rural areas hopefully is staying maintained for the most part, given the land use controls we have there. And is that balance working, I guess is my question.
That's a really good question as well. I think so. It'll take some time in terms of future greenhouse gas inventories to monitor that progress over time. There's a couple reasons that we would, you know, let's say we have a area where like development is going to happen or could or would happen the kind of idea, and maybe this is something you already are thinking about, but that like the rationale behind the incentive for more density there is helping, you know, to reduce transportation emissions. So if there's less sprawl and more kind of denser development in the development area. So the transportation emissions piece. And then there's also a bit of a building energy efficiency piece that, you know, if you have more shared walls, that can help reduce the overall building energy emissions from mostly from like heating and cooling. And then we have to get a little bit creative about, you know, certainly a larger apartment building, maybe that leaves a little bit less space for greenery on site. And at the same time, you know, I think I've seen apartment communities where there's like really excellent, you know, landscaping that was done and a lot of attention to maintaining or replacing tree canopy cover in those spots. So I think there's opportunities for creativity. What I've heard from some of the feedback that I've gotten from like our economic development office is that, you know, there's a lot of developers where it's like they kind of both are weighing the bottom line. Maybe the area is by right development, so they can do something with it regardless. And they're weighing their bottom line with also maybe wanting to do the right thing, but not sure if the economics fit. And so that's where that kind of action comes in, is one way to hopefully incentivize them to maybe just put solar panels on the rooftop when they build the building, or improve the landscaping, thinking about biodiversity and carbon sequestration, that it can help to, you know, give them a little bit of a carrot in terms of the density. So that's like one sort of particular example. Did that answer your question? I don't know that I'll be able to answer it again in entirety, but I hope that offers something.
It helps a little bit. I guess I'm just trying to understand how we, maybe my way to phrase it is not lose sight of the fact that, yes, while there is tree canopy that is inevitably going to be lost in the designated development areas by its very nature, that's the whole point, is encourage it in a dense urban area, small, only 5% in our community. And yes, of course, there's landscape regulations and requirements to replace. It's never quite the same as what comes down, of course. But that the entire point or purpose, underlying premise of that policy is that by concentrating development in that 5%, you are preserving the remaining 95% for open space, agriculture, forestry, and very, very low density residential. And I guess maybe it's a comment that we kind of lose sight of that sometimes, I think. So I was just happy to see in the plan that there is a nod and appreciation to, that's part of our overall growth management strategy. And yes, we have to have high standards in the development areas as well, but that as a starting point, that's a good thing as compared to having just unlimited sprawl. Then we'd really see a loss of tree canopy, is maybe what I'm trying to say. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Jim?
Thanks. I mean, I would add to that I think it's, you know, I agree 100% with Valerie that broad brush, my understanding is that density is good for, you know, for climate change. So in large part, so long as it's done commensurately with the right infrastructure to support people getting to places, not necessarily in cars. And you have denser houses, but be closer to people that you can get to in, you know, on a bicycle or walking or what have you. So you're not forced into a car every single time you need to get out. So more houses close together with, you know, without cars. And could you fix that? That'd be great. Thanks.
I left my magic wand in the car, but I'll go get it.
I mean, I think also you might have to at some point incentivize rural landowners planting more trees in that case, because I don't think it goes without, I mean, I don't think that it's fair to assume that just because an area isn't being developed, that houses aren't being built and trees aren't coming down in rural areas. So, you know,
and we do have, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
There are some actions to that effect. I mean, some of the programs will need to be fleshed out. It's a really good point. Some of the programs will need to be fleshed out, but we do have some actions in the landscape chapter of the plan, kind of looking at that, of how can we, incentivize tree plantings in, on land where they're not existing. Thinking also about kind of the intersection with biodiversity and native plants and those kinds of issues that a lot of folks care about. But yeah, you're absolutely right that looking at where we can improve that is important.
Dan?
Are there others who want to go? I have a list, but I don't want to take a lot of time if others haven't even had a chance to say anything. So please jump up and down if you want to jump in first.
Yeah, I was just gonna, if anybody else on the committee wanted to talk, we have a hand up in attendees, and so we can hear you, Anne, or anybody else, and then.
All right, well then I'll try to be quick. But there's no guarantee. I mean, I'm just going down the list of the things that Gabe had talked about. And number one, Gabe, you really put my mind at ease about the fact that we've been talking about things for 20 years and haven't done anything, because since you have arrived, we have now started to really do things, and I'm very grateful. So we want to support you in any way we can to give you the ammo you need to make substantive changes. And those are going to be hard choices, because I think one thing I've learned over these years is that people want what they want, and they don't want to let facts get in the way if it interferes with them getting what they want. And so that means that whole discussion of science or data or whatever, I mean, I have lost so many debates based upon good ideas because people want what they want and they really don't want to hear it. So I hope that you will have better success than I have had working around that dilemma. And every time I go by a schoolyard nowadays and see 3 deep or 25 deep cars in both directions, all idling for 45 minutes waiting to pick up their little precious because we don't have buses, makes me insane. But I won't yell about that anymore, except I did get an email from somebody whose child took a picture on the bus, and there were 3 children per seat and children sitting in the aisle all the way home. And that went straight to the superintendent, and I hope that will never happen again, because that is a danger waiting to happen, which is not on topic at all. Now, going back to topic, sorry. You mentioned about flood risks, and I'm really glad to hear you talking about that. And one element that you may not be able to talk about, but I wish you would think about it in the future, is how we can strengthen our rules so that one person's bad behavior does not destroy their neighbor's property. And based upon bad land use management, bad forestry management, those kinds of things happen all the time. And everybody so far just says, oh, well, too bad. So what? You had $30,000 in damage caused by your neighbor. But so that's just something where I hope we will figure out a way to work on that in a more appropriate way going forward. I'm also, as a farmer, particularly interested in your comment about agriculture. And I hope that the whole climate change discussion will begin to think more about separating out grass-fed livestock or pasture-raised livestock as opposed to feedlot-raised livestock, because feedlot-raised livestock is repulsive as far as climate impacts with all the raising of corn and all that stuff. Whereas if you're have livestock out on pasture, it actually improves the quality of the grass, which then allows the grass to sequester more. And that's my rationalization for raising cows. And that's what it is. But I hope that more science will be put toward that sometime in the future for people who at least want to have some meat protein. Source of electric power has always worried me. When we're using electrification as the answer to all of our problems, when we're talking about competitive land use, and are we taking thousands of acres on the Eastern Shore out of growing produce and rows of tomatoes as far as the eye can see and putting thousands of acres under solar panels, instead of putting those solar panels on industrial rooftops and brownfields and places where you can't grow things, because our population is growing and we need to have that prime soil for produce and things really protected. And I hope that will get to be part of the discussion sometime soon, because I think every rooftop everywhere should have one. And the question also for your list of many questions is, do we have the authority to require that new construction have solar panels if it is cited correctly? And that's a Michael Dellinger question, but I thought I'd pass it to you and you can pass it to him. All right, let me zoom down my list here. I did that already. Okay. Yeah, we've talked about trees, so that's terrific. I will stop. I don't want to monopolize the whole day, except to, well, I already talked about it a little bit. The data, I found that people usually take data that I give them and beat me over the head with it. So we have to think about how to help people understand the sort of cosmic nature of the question. Because if we rely on only data and not the sort of moral obligation issue, then they will find a way to say, well, that data isn't right because it isn't perfect. Take, for example, how it took 50 years to win the debate about cigarettes and the damage they cause, or asbestos and the damage it causes. So I really like your approach on the community benefits and the little website thing that you showed us. I can't wait to see more of that, but I will stop. Thank you very much.
Well, Supervisor Malik, these are really great comments and kind of points and questions. I've jotted them down. And I know you said it was somewhat of a list of kind of food for thought and things to look into. Just one reply on one of the points that you mentioned that hopefully you'll be interested in. I'm working with colleagues in community development to look at the kind of language that we can include in the comprehensive plan around large scale solar. And we have some we have actions and language in the climate action plan that talks about doing what you just said, which is prioritizing brownfields, kind of post-industrial lots, and the parking lot, old parking lots, parking structure, rooftops, et cetera. So we have that language in the plan, and it basically says, craft policy language that can go into the comprehensive plan that takes these things into account. So I've been actually working with some colleagues to try to do that. And we've talked to folks, the planners in community development for whom the couple of recent solar utility facility applications came across their desks to understand what their process was like. And we're working now to try to kind of fold in some language around, hey, we know that solar is important. And also we'd like to see it done in these ways that can preserve habitat, biodiversity. There's a cool pilot project that my parents shared with me. They live in Colorado, and they care a lot about climate action. So they sent me an article about a kind of a research project of a solar facility in Colorado where they had installed the panels, not just high enough for sheep to graze, but they were also planting kind of like part sun, part shade like food crops that do well in partial shade, to see how well that kind of an operation could work in terms of producing food and having panels, which was cool. And it was still kind of a research pilot, but that was something that gave me some excitement about kind of opportunities work for maybe win-win in that regard.
Sandy?
Yeah, I apologize if I'm treading on turf that you guys have already covered. I sent a note to Joe indicating that I was going to be a little late tonight, so I missed the early part of your discussion, Gabe. But I'm wondering if you have any particular plans to collaborate with homeowners associations to try to encourage, green initiatives, be it planting of trees or creation of rain gardens. I think that homeowners are always cognizant of the fees they pay each month or each quarter. And it would be very nice if the county would collaborate with HOAs as it does with developers to try to incentivize some of the green initiatives you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Two responses to that, or two thoughts on that. One is, if you, in the presentation that I'll share around, there's a link to this. A couple folks have mentioned this online resource that we created. And one of the elements we have in there is kind of an invitation to county residents to engage your HOA from sort of the bottom up perspective, or grassroots perspective. We definitely think there's a kind of wonderful opportunity to partner and collaborate with HOAs. And so to the extent that residents are interested in connecting around some of these topics, that's really great. And then on the local government side, a colleague of mine a couple months ago had mentioned that a HOA that he had connected with around somewhat of a different issue, but the HOA had communicated they were interested in doing some sort of training on invasive plants and how they can better manage invasives in their common areas. And so he had brought up the idea to our team of developing some kind of training that we could bring to that group. And I thought, well, gosh, maybe there are other HOAs who have the same interest and or have other topical interests about how they could kind of steward their associations to help advance some of these goals.
Yeah, if you're not aware of PRISM, it's a group out this way that is very cognizant of the invasives problem and probably would be willing to partner with the county to do some training. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you. Anybody else? Great, I will get Carolyn to unmute Matt.
Good evening, y'all.
Can you introduce yourself and maybe say where you live, like we? Like
Hey, yeah, I'm Matt Helt. I live on St. George, born and raised in Crozet. So a couple of things. One, it's wonderful to hear somebody in the county actually talking about bike ped infrastructure. We just went through the quote unquote Crozet master plan, and we couldn't get the county to even address the complexities of sidewalks or bike paths or trails. A few token projects, but really ignore the entirety of the fact that to get anywhere in Crozet, you have to drive a car. And as we know, the county will never be able to build enough roads to get people around Crozet, meaning the only opportunity we have to reduce carbon emissions from transportation is to build some daggone trails, build some bike lanes, and actually do it 10, 20 years ago when development started, not waiting until after development's already done. So frankly, it's great to hear someone actually talk about it, but it'd be even better to see the county actually do something about it. You mentioned open barren spaces. For those of us who are born and raised here, those are the only green spaces that are left in Crozet. They need to be parks, pocket parks, ball fields, nature preserves. There's not places for kids to play. They're forced to play in the streets because the county didn't plan for the development properly. So I hope that we don't encourage more development on little green space we have left. Those should be parks, access for the public. Forest canopy is a great topic, but I didn't hear you mention anything about the thousands of trees that have been killed by development and the thousands of trees who have been killed by emerald ash borer. The county doesn't even have an arborist on staff. You can tell that's the case because everyone's articulated the problems with all the neighborhoods and developments. I really like to see native shrubs and trees, dogwoods, redbuds, serviceberries, chinkapins, and many others incorporated, not just oaks. Oaks are great too, but diversity is really important in that forest canopy. And I hope that we foster that in the county and not just target a few things and let developers do whatever the developers do. So plant more trees. I can't tell how many trees the county has planted in the last year. Alamo County is one of the largest landowners, owns property all across. But if you go to many county buildings, there's a lack of tree coverage. Trees are dying. I was recently at Mint Springs Park and there's probably 10 or 20 dead ash trees just in the green space. Doesn't sound like the parks have budgets to remove the trees or to plant new trees. So it's really concerning that, again, we're talking about forest canopy and we can't even manage the trees that are dead in our local park here. Everyone's articulated the problems that happen around Crozet Park. There's no trees left there. And then if you look at the view in Crozet, this atrocious apartment building built upon massive retaining walls, how many trees are planted there? I just drove by. It seems bare and it looks ugly. It needs Virginia creeper all over those walls. They need to put redbuds, dogwoods, oaks, a mixture of trees, because it's a heat island, as everyone's articulated. Really glad to hear Ann talk about farmers. The majority of the cows, or all the cows here in this county, are grass-fed, some rotationally. There's a huge difference in greenhouse gas or carbon emissions from cows that are fed on pasture as opposed to those who are shipped in on grain. And then if we really wanted to talk about agriculture, I was just recently in Damascus, Virginia. The tiny little town of Damascus, they built a farmer's market pavilion. We've had a successful farmer's market here in Crozet for decades, yet to see the county even contribute to building a pavilion. Engineering designs, land acquisition. We really wanted to truly promote agriculture and reduce carbon emissions. The first thing the county should do is acquire land and build a pavilion for our farmer's market. Additionally, y'all talked about schools. Wouldn't it be great if our schools were accessible via, bike or foot? That would probably cut back on a lot of emissions on school buses. I'd love to see where the county is going to be purchasing any electric buses, or they're building this huge addition to Crozet School. Maybe I missed where they talked about EV chargers. There's tons of new parking spots, but I don't see any plans for electric vehicle charging, including for school buses. And then let's see, is the county doing anything to look at e-bikes and their potential to reduce carbon? Also the potential for our bike shops to sell more bikes. And then Ann mentioned rooftop solar. If you want to cut carbon emissions, rooftop solar, there's a lot of people in Crozet. We're probably the highest density in Albemarle County of rooftop solar, but I'd like to see a lot more of it, especially in the larger developments. And then lastly, everything I've heard from Albemarle County, there's a lot of talk, very little action, a lot of empty promises, very little commitment. And I hope the county actually does something more than a cursory, a couple 1,000-hour report, glossy thing, but then never actually follows through on it. I would like to see accountability built into the county action plan. And if the county doesn't meet its targets, the county executive is removed from their position, or other people in community development are removed, or people on the board are required to acknowledge their failure to follow through and accomplish the targets set forth in the plan. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. A lot of really great comments and points that you made. I'd love to have more of a conversation, because I know with the time left I think, well, originally the meeting invite I got was for ended at 8:30, but then it was for 9. Are we going till 8:30 or 9?
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Well,
we don't have to, I want to hear from Ann. We have 10 or 15 more minutes of things to talk about when we wrap up.
Sure.
So we can have a few more minutes here.
Yeah, well, I'll just say I tried to write down as much as I could of Matt's comments, and I'll just say I probably wouldn't be able to kind of capture all of them in the depth that I would like to. But they're really good points, and for anyone who's on this meeting, as well as for Matt and others who are tuned in, we're one of the things that we're doing with our climate program that I'm really excited about is really trying to have robust community engagement. So I won't give you my personal email because just of spelling, but an email that will get forwarded to my personal email that then we can connect with is climate@albemarle.org. So if you want to have further conversation in detail about any of this, and kind of get more into some of the details and kind of what the county can do, what we hope to encourage our community to get involved in, I'd love to talk more about that. So climate@albemarle.org, that gets forwarded directly to my work email, and then we can set up a time to chat.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. Sandy, did you have another comment?
Yeah, just 2 questions, one for Gabe, one for Ann. It seems to me that the impediments to date toward doing green things are either the lack of funds or the failure of the state to make it possible for us to do things. So Gabe, I'm wondering if your report addresses any sort of legislative initiatives we need to be taking in Richmond to be able to do some of the things we want to do. And Ann, I'm curious as to whether you sense any sentiment on the board for raising taxes. I mean, feel like there's a crying need for more funds for so many things. And I was really disheartened by your colleague's remark about how the board's spending so much money in Crozet and you people need to quit whining. I just thought that was a really ignorant remark. When you dump all the population in Crozet, there has to be infrastructure here and there has to be provision for green space. And, you know, the board should have realized going in that there was going to be a lot of spending here if you're going to put all your population here. So anyway, I'll let you two have at my questions.
Well, I
Supervisor
guess let
Malik,
me,
do you want to go first?
well, I was just going to say, is there any legislative provision, or is that probably the next phase? I mean, have you all discussed that at all? For things,
Yeah.
one of my questions earlier was, are there things for which we have authority that we haven't done yet? And the other side of that is, what things should we really be doing that we don't have authority to do? And that's not a right now question, but that's the gap that has both directions involved, that bites us in the butt every time we turn around. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So there are some things that we may not have authority to do, and that would be good to have part of the legislative agenda for encouraging the state to open up the possibility to do that. Some of the work that we're currently doing, if you all ever want to have me back in a few months or something like that, I could share this spreadsheet that we've been building to help us do the prioritization of the actions. One of the kind of criteria that we have in that is looking at basically a yes or no, do we currently have enabling authority? And then looking at other aspects like the degree to which an action will contribute to emissions reductions, and also some of these other co-benefits for the community, how it'll contribute to health and well-being, local economy, local environment, and equity. So that's how we're hoping to kind of then create some of those lists that we could, for things we don't have authority to do, bring those to the Board of Supervisors. And then for things that we do have, there's the current work to, try to make headway on those, and also, prioritize them, because we can't necessarily do everything at once. So we want to try to do some of the kind of bigger fish first. I'll say, I have really great collaborative relationships with many of my colleagues, and we've been leveraging those relationships to push a lot of things forward. And climate action is so big, I could probably use a little bit of extra help. We're looking at the possibility of like hiring a program assistant to kind of grow the program with me. So that's certainly something too that some extra staff would also go a long way.
I will just add to Sandy's question that there was no appetite to raise taxes further than the burdens that were already laid on this year. And thinking back to 2008, when the end of the housing bubble was about to happen, and actually 2007, the previous board, in a similar circumstance, lowered the tax rate 6 cents. And then the recession happened, and then we got $100 million of capital that was not spent. And I know you've all heard me talk about this before, but the reason I did not support cutting now was because we have a list as long as my arms and legs of projects that have been postponed for decades. The Eastern Avenue Bridge came on the list in 1992, and now it is finally about to get a blessing, I think, from the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and we have to have local cash to be able to do our share of that to get that to happen. So that's just one small example of the many, many. And my question too about the money from the Park and Tabor sidewalks was shifted to complete the funding for something up at Berkmar to connect that road that was not finished during the 29 solutions. And so that account needs to be refilled in the new year to get that back on the list again.
So how come it was so easy for Frank Stoner to get $2.5 million and you can't get money for sidewalks to protect kids? It just seems like a really warped perspective.
Well, it's a return on investment question right now, and we have not achieved the quality of life benefit has not achieved equity with the $20 million of cash investment plus the $80 million in value that's coming. So, and there's a quality of life investment in that plaza as well that I think is going to be very, very important to Crozet. But it is painful when we've seen all these other projects that have been on the list for a very long time to be pushed further and further down. So I understand your frustration about that.
Thanks. Any other comments? We might be able to let Gabe go if we're done with the climate talks. Going once. All right. Well, thanks so much. And I do appreciate your
Wait,
offer.
Matt has his hand up again.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Matt.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that Gabe is more than welcome to come to Crozet. A lot of the community development staff is scared of Crozet, and I hope that you're not scared and you're willing to come out and visit. We can go to Star Hill or God forbid, there's a bike lane. We could get over to Pro Renata as well. But love to get you out here and see some of so you can see firsthand the challenges that we have, the challenges we're facing by the ridiculous amounts of development with lack of infrastructure that's happened here in Crozet. So please come on out. Love to host you anytime.
Yes, let's do it. The weather is getting good for it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was gonna say, I appreciate your offer to come back and maybe keep us in the loop as you get farther along in the next few months. So I'll pass it along to Joe and Rachel as you guys are planning agendas going forward. So I think it was great to have you tonight.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat. And please do, if you go to the website, when you can sign up for the Albemarle County newsletter, there's a number of different sublists, and we have one for environmental stewardship that gets the updates about opportunities for community engagement, updates about kind of things that we're doing with the climate program and other related environmental programs. So if you're interested, please do, if you're not already signed up, sign up for those, and that's a great way to stay in the loop.
Yeah, and do send out the things you've talked about sending out, and we can make sure that everybody gets it, and I can share it with the attendees list. And like I always say, if you aren't getting emails from me or now from Joe, please let me know so I can add you to our, if you're not on the committee, so I can add you to our notification list. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe.
Yeah. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thanks. With the next few minutes, we're going to hear a budget update from Anne, if that's
all right.
possible.
I will begin by saying that it's a horrifyingly large number. And I said this to senior staff last week, that it is more than 100% more than it was the year I joined the board. And that is pretty astonishing. I mean, there's millions in there, of course, that has come from outside sources, your federal tax dollars at work. So we're bringing home more federal money than we have in the past. But as everybody I know understands, the higher the population, the higher the cost. Also for climate change, the higher the impact on the climate and on all the natural resources, the more people we have. And we have 20,000 more people than we had in 2008. And so costs have definitely gone up. And I think one of our biggest burdens or biggest obstacles to success in the county has been being able to hold on to staff, as we have seen competition for sort of the best and the brightest, well-trained. I mean, people, local governments, excuse me, all over the Commonwealth have told me, oh, we'll hire your staff anytime. Do you have anybody you can share? And I've said, hell no, absolutely not. But we have, the university has hired many of our staff people. And so we are in a continual challenge to have salaries that are, there's no way we can compete with the university. They're offering $20,000 more for the same job than we can pay. And that is why there were bonuses offered this year and an increase in salary offered this year as a recruitment and retention skill sort of platform. Because whether it is code enforcement or building inspectors or water, and I just met a new engineer. We walked around over there at Indigo Lane to look at various and sundry things yesterday. And the fact that we have finally, after 5 years, have that position in the budget to be able to hire somebody to do that job means that we will be able to have better supervision. But it is a real challenge to keep up with what is the challenge, the various things that are going on that have to be watched over. So I have no excuses other than the fact that the needs were enormous. And there were many, many needs that were not funded at all. So if you have specific questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them, but I don't really, I mean, I think all of you probably followed the budget discussions pretty well. I am very proud of the fact that we have 5 new firefighters who were trained and hired specifically to do the day shift at the Crozet Fire Department at the Crozet volunteers' request, because they realized that they were overstretched with their crew that they had to be able to do 24/7 still after 111 years of doing 24/7 all alone. And so we were able to get those folks there. And Phil, I can't remember his name now, the chief of the captain on the day shift is a former Crozet volunteer junior firefighter. And so it's like coming home for him. And he seems that seems to be working very, very well. And it has been a real challenge to try to see how we can better support our volunteers to keep the volunteer system very, very strong, because those 400 actives who are currently working their day job as well as their night shift are really saving our bacon financially as well as in health and safety. And I'm eternally grateful, and certainly don't have the magic solution that makes it possible for folks to continue to do that when many of them now have to have 2 jobs instead of just one. You know, the economy sucks compared to the way it was 30 years ago, when I took much less of a burden on families to be able to live very comfortably. So for those of you who are in your 20s and 30s, I'm sorry, because it was a lot easier when I was in my 20s and 30s to get a start, because the economy was much simpler back then. So any questions specifically that you have that you want to ask about the budget? Okay.
No. Well,
Sandra and Matt both have their hand up.
I think Sandy's was from before.
Okay, Matt has his hand up again.
Hey, and just to plug, one of the things really disappointed me about the Crozet master plan is, we've added all this development to Crozet, but no one knows the true cost of that development. As you alluded to, the bridge of Eastern Avenue was at 92. We're going on, 30 years now. And I would really like the county to calculate the cost of development in Crozet and how many hundreds of millions of dollars in deferred maintenance and necessary infrastructure the county has not funded courtesy development. And then obviously plug, we got the raffle for the fire department on Saturday night. I would be curious how many people on this call have purchased their tickets and have encouraged their neighbors to purchase their tickets. And if they sold out of tickets, doesn't matter. Donate $100 to the fire department. And of course, we need a new rescue squad building. So I hope everyone who has moved here in the last 20 years has never supported the rescue squad, goes ahead and cuts a check for $1,000. We'll get that building built in no time. So I hope all y'all write that $1,000 check and that you get your neighbors to do the same thing.
Thank you, Matt. That's fabulous. Yeah, the twice.
I'll throw in a thank you too, Matt, for that.
The twice a year barbecue at the firehouse is my turn to drop off the checks at the rescue squad and at the Earlysville house as well. So they all benefit from Gary Dillon and his guys doing all that cooking out there, which is wonderful. So very, very good points. Absolutely.
And I think that people should volunteer.
Yes, absolutely. And it takes all different kinds of skills, because I do not have the courage or the skill to either provide the medical care or run into the burning building, but I could drive. And I know, I have a CDL already. And so that's something that I could do. But I know that there are different tasks throughout all these organizations where different people with different interests and different skills can make a huge difference. And I really hope that you all will join up with those community boards and help them out.
Yeah. I mean, more people in Crozet seems like a bigger pool. I mean, even with economy challenges, we have a bigger population to get volunteers out of now. So I hope people feel inclined to step up. Anything else? We can also just, open it up to other topics if anybody has anything they wanted to throw out for committee business. Sandy?
Yeah, I don't know what happened to Joe. Is he on the call?
No, Joe and Mark both couldn't be here tonight, which is why I am.
Well, I apologize to everybody because I tried to communicate with the group, just by doing a reply all, and apparently we can't do that.
No.
But I had written to Joe, since he was the one who notified us of tonight's meeting. I thought he was going to be presiding. I was just really disturbed by this remark that Diantha McKeel made after the board voted unanimously to allocate another 2.5 million to this plaza. I mean, I know Ann feels, and I'll let her make the case, that this is going to be some great gift to Crozet, but what is the life of a child worth? You all voted to let the Crozet Park expand. That's going to drive people to the park, but there's no way for children to get there, short of having their parents drive them, without putting their lives at risk. And I constantly see people walking up and down Hilltop and Tabor and Park on the road. It's just a very unsafe situation. And it seems to me an abrogation of the board's responsibility to these residents to make provision for sidewalks. So Diantha McKeel, after this $2.5 million.
Sandy, sorry,
Yes.
can I just interrupt though before because I agree with I agree that Diantha is pretty hard on us. But just to reply about the vote or the money that's being spent on the plaza. I mean, I just think that development is going to include infrastructure. I mean, the plaza and the connecting streets that this whole Barnes development is going to provide is going to lead to pedestrian. I mean, it includes pedestrian and hopefully soon. That's what this money is. I'm hoping going to be finally push this over to actually building, bike ped connection to the park. So it's a little counterintuitive to be. I'm glad that we're getting the money to spend. I mean, the plaza is one part of that's hopefully, going to be there's a lot of road network with sidewalks being built in this development.
Well, the question is though, again, going back to the issue of Crozet Park, is the plaza going to mean sidewalks on Park? I mean, Park at the very least, but also possibly Tabor and Hilltop should have sidewalks. I mean, they're just, it's nuts. I don't know if any of you were watching the board meeting, but according to the paper, what McKeel said was, just to be clear for the public, this continues a history of the supervisors and staff supporting the Crozet community infrastructure through Albemarle County dollars. To be very simple about this, she said, we hear sometimes from the folks in Crozet saying that we don't support them. And I just have to go on record to say this is the continuation. I don't know that it is necessary to give totals, but I think at one point we were up to about 116 to 119 million dollars over the last 6 to 8 years. This is another investment in Crozet, which we're supporting. And I just think somebody has to say that. Well, good for you, Diantha. How many people moved into your district? You know, I mean, we have got thousands of new residents over those years, and we just haven't done the basics. So I just wondered if the Community Advisory Committee wanted to say anything formally by way of response, or if I get to do it. If anybody wants to sign my letter, I'll probably write something, but I just felt like it begged a response. I just thought it was an outrage.
I wonder if there is information, if people, I forget who, well, I guess it's David, usually David Mitchell, our former committee member, who used to bring up property taxes in Western Albemarle being, you know, based on appraisals, how much money Western Albemarle taxpayers are paying relative as well.
Yeah, I've never seen those numbers. Has anybody ever done the math?
I'm just saying you could do some math yourself, probably. Sean, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, when Sandy brought that up much earlier in the meeting, I've sort of been fuming at a low level thinking about that comment and just how BS I think that is for a supervisor to make. Would it be appropriate for us to invite her to a CACC meeting and chat with us?
I know she has the CACs that she meets with in her own district, and she came out to tour the JB Barnes project and had a very nice visit. She has her right to her opinion. There is, I think, 30-some million dollars that has been spent. I remember this came up from a former applicant out on 250 a number of years ago. But that included Jarman's Gap Road, which is $15 million, and the 12 million for the library. And so it doesn't take much of big projects like that in the streetscape to get to that number. And if you add on the Crozet Elementary School addition, you know, these are things that are not, this is not an issue to fight about. And I basically will say thank you very much. And that I want that to be the end of it, because it stands on its own. And I do not encourage this committee to send any correspondence at all. I think that I would wish that you didn't.
Well, I'm not sure what this committee exists for some days, but I appreciate wanting to keep things as polite as possible. And I certainly don't want to offend any other supervisors. So, you know, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks.
Does anybody else have comments?
I mean, I guess this is for
Matt has his hand up again.
I'm sorry, just to reply to Ally just quickly. I think probably for a future meeting, maybe we do need to start talking about special assessments, because obviously we're not going to get things funded in this community without offering to pay more. And it's unfortunate that we get stuck with the bill, but we are stuck with the traffic and the risks that happen when infrastructure is not sufficient.
You can go ahead, Matt.
I'd invite any member of the Board of Supervisors to come over to St. George Avenue and try to cross Crozet any time of the day. There are a whole bunch of people that are senior citizens on the board. We probably lose 3 or 4 of them in one crossing. So if they want to come over and see how dangerous it is to live in our neighborhood, then maybe they might have a different perspective of why we've been fighting, you know, born and raised here, mom's born and raised here, been in this house for 40 years, why we'd love a daggone crosswalk and some streetscaping on our side of Crozet Avenue.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've been chastised personally by members of the Board of Supervisors for, having opinions over the course of the last few years serving on this committee. So I feel put in my place and ready to hand this role over to Joe. So that being said, it was nice to see you all tonight. And I'm glad that you're all, that all of us are still meeting. And, I also would go on record saying, I thank the Village of Rivanna for keeping us, for letting us know what's going on in their CAC. And I hope that eventually some of these COVID restrictions are dropped and we can start meeting in person again, perhaps having those joint CAC meetings in person, perhaps having more training sessions for CAC members, the onboarding of our new members. I'm just not really quite sure they've had even the FOIA training, like not knowing that we can't reply all and things like that. I want to be more than just a community engagement checkbox with the amount of hours that I have donated to this role. So I hope that we can, continue to be relevant. And I don't know, I'm rambling now, so that's where I am. And so with that, also, I just would like to ask Rachel, is there any chance that CACs are going to meet in person?
Yes, there is a plan for that. The county has a tiered system and CACs are in the third tier. Right now we're on tier 1, which is just the board, planning commission, and school board are meeting in person. Tier 2, I believe, starts in June, which are a couple of other committees. And then tier 3, I think tentatively is sometime in the late summer, early fall. I don't think a date has been established yet for tier 3, but we're moving towards it.
Okay, that's good. I can't wait. I just think that it's time for us to be back in the same room where we, I just think we're going to get a lot more accomplished, and I'm glad to hear that. And maybe we'll even reach out to the library and see if we can get our meeting space tentatively scheduled for the fall. So
great idea. Yeah. Well, I would like to just close by saying I want you all to feel relevant, because I am much better prepared to represent the community with your help and with your input and with your discussions. And so please do not shrink away from your time and coming to these meetings and adding your good ideas all the time. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It does mean a lot to me to be to be thanked. Because it's been a little grueling, and I certainly wouldn't expect my supervisor to talk to other CACs the way that some of your colleagues have talked to us. So thank you for representing us well, and thanks to my committee members for continuing to show up. And our next meeting, let me grab my thing. Is tentatively scheduled for June 8th, I think. Opportunity at 7 p.m. on Zoom. Opportunities for the public to access and participate in the electronic meeting will be posted at a later date in accordance with our emergency ordinance number 20-A16 and open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information.
And before I let Rachel go, Rachel, is there anything else in the queue for upcoming community meetings or anything like that? I guess I missed both because I had a conflict with the board meeting. Both of the meetings for Old Dominion and Whitegate were scheduled on same time as board meetings. So that was poor from my perspective, as far as being able to hear it for myself without the recording. But are there things coming up in June that we should all be anticipating?
I don't know of any community meetings that you all will have in June, I will double check with our review team, and there is a possibility that something could come in May that could go in June. But I will check on that and let you all know.
Okay.
One topic I know, an update from RWSA on all of their projects. They've asked to come out again. So I'll coordinate with Joe and see if we can get them to come out in June.
Okay, if they have updates. I think one thing that is important with community meetings is for the project to be far enough along that they're actually able to answer questions from constituents. Because I think when we've had great angst, it's been because it was so early, because it was convenient for the applicant. But then they said, well, we don't know about this and we don't know about that. And it begins to feel very squirrely. And then when things come out after the community meeting, there's no chance to have any real bona fide input about that. So I hope you can think about a higher threshold before they are allowed to go forward, so that there's more information that can be shared. We understand things may evolve, and it's fine to say, well, we're considering A and B and we don't know which we're going to do yet, but at least people are aware of what A and B are. And that will help people to be able to make a more reasonable contribution, and hopefully we'll get some earlier exchanges that might resolve some of these issues that we're facing now. All right, thank you all.
And Rachel, will we, like, if there are community meetings that don't happen at the CAC, will the CAC be notified with, specifically, like as far as the, a calendar of agenda plans that you guys shared in the past month? Like, I just wasn't sure if community meetings for applications or SUPs or whatever come up that don't fit into the CAC schedule, will it be like, will the CAC members be notified of, of those meetings that happen outside of our meeting? Do you know what I mean? Without being in the 1 mile radius of the affected,
Oh, I see what you mean. We rarely do that. If it were in Crozet, we would almost always come to the CAC unless it was some bizarre circumstance. And if that happened, we would absolutely notify you all.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure, because with the calendar being being a little more set for the year, I would want to make sure that if that happened, it was sort of required that the CAC be notified of a meeting that happens of that type,
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, we would absolutely notify the CAC, but we would probably recommend that it just go to the next available meeting.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Already set, we would ask them to come.
Sometimes there's time issues and the developer or the applicant, wants to,
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I'm hoping will not happen anymore, because the old meeting room was at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And come on.
Yeah.
So that kind of accommodation, I hope, will not become commonplace, because it is a real challenge for citizens to be able to be there and to hear, or even neighbors to be there to hear. So people are used to coming to these meetings on the second Wednesday at 7 o'clock, and we want to keep them coming. Fill up those chairs when we get the room back again.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really looking forward to it. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.